Have you ever asked your players whether they want to play to level 20 or just want to stop wherever the module happens to drop them off at the end of the story at like level 11 or whatever? I have. In fact, I always ask, and out of the 8 games that I'm currently running, 5 of them are in the top tiers right now, and a grand total of 0 of them didn't at least express a desire to go all of the way. Today's question is brought to us by Brady, who asks how to keep high-level fun in actual practical play, despite all the shenanigans that people are capable of pulling off in the top levels of Dungeons & Dragons. Thanks, Brady, for the question, and thank you to Tank Class supporters who not only get my videos early, but get to decide what I muse on week in, week out. I hear a lot of people talking about high-level play sucks in Dungeons & Dragons, and I have a question for them that I don't think gets answered often enough. And that is, how do you know? It's kind of like when people talk about, money not buying happiness or, being rich not being all it's cracked up to be. But unless you've actually tried it out for yourself, are you really sure? Or are you just hoping that that's the case because it's easier than becoming rich in the first place? Goodness knows, as a professional DM, I'm far from rich myself, but I'm willing to just, question the premise on whether or not I know what I'm talking about when it comes to that, because I haven't experienced it. Now, playing in high tiers, on the other hand, I have experienced a number of times. I've gotten loads of campaigns that have gotten to 15, 16, 17 before we finished the story to a satisfying point and closed out, and I've got a number of campaigns at level 20 that we've run either into the epic levels over the years or have stopped at the narratively appropriate moment after getting access to our capstone abilities and finding most of them kind of lackluster. Getting a little bit of experience has taught me that the high levels of play don't suck, and that they're honestly pretty well done for Dungeons & Dragons in a lot of different ways. And maybe that's a hot take. Is it harder to run Dungeons & Dragons at the highest levels? Absolutely. It does take a lot more effort and work in some departments than does creating a satisfying story at lower levels of play. But in other ways, it's actually kind of easier. Obviously, you're going to have to understand the rules a lot better in the higher tiers because there's going to be rules that you have not gotten acquainted with over the course of your leveling that you now have to be acquainted with because anything can happen. It's harder because you don't necessarily know what your players are going to do, and at any moment they might wish for something that was completely out of line of where you were thinking, and you just have no idea where they're going with it. Being able to improvise on the spot is a requirement to be a decent DM at high-level play, because at any given time, a solution that you completely did not envision is going to come up. That's not to say that that doesn't happen at low levels as well, but because things are sort of more tightly held together, it's maybe not quite as painful or challenging for most people to think outside the box in those moments as it is when your players randomly shift to a completely different plane of existence or otherwise do something that is just mind-blowingly different from what you had in mind for your session that night. But you can make it good, and there are a number of things that I found that really helped me to let go of my stress of playing high-level campaigns, and the first one was to throw the challenge rating system out the window after about level 13 or so. After about level 13 or so, when players have got access to world-changing spells that just completely shift how the game goes, I don't worry about whether or not any given situation that I create for my players is balanced. I have some sort of thoughts in my head as to what might be a TPK waiting to happen, but even in a lot of cases, even then, I'll still allow it to come out on play, and I'll just make sure that players get lots of information up front about the situations that they're going to walk into, so that they can make the choice. They can self-select how difficult they want encounters to be, and they can use the amazing resources available at their disposal to shift a super challenging situation into something more inside of their skill set. An example of this from a campaign that's wrapping up right now at level 20, my crazy group of players decided that they were going to take on a frost giant longship. They knew that it was crewed by over 20 giants, but they're high level and they figured that they can take on 20 giants in a sitting. When there's a handful of surprises and extra creatures, they got a little bit worried, but they pulled out some amazing spells that completely changed how the battlefield took place. Mass Suggestion being one particular standout, as Brady, in fact, utilized Mass Suggestion to cause a large number of these giants to leap overboard and swim away from the vessel instead of continuing the fight. These kinds of things really benefit from being fans of your players and from opening up the field of what you might put out into play to match the situation instead of trying to match to the challenge rating that your players need. One of the things that seems really strange in the only book that we currently have for D&D that details dungeons for 20th level is in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. They include a lot of low CR creatures occupying places with a handful of standout creatures that are actually a challenge to the party. And the reason for that is because those low-level creatures make sense in that situation. And so even though they're not in any way, shape, or form a challenge for the party to be able to defeat, they're what makes sense there, and so including them is the right decision. And then the standout fights that really change things around, those get to be included as the feature pieces of the dungeon instead of making every opponent challenge rating appropriate and trying to bank out the encounters that your party are going to go through. As long as you have appropriate time pressure and creatures in there that are suitable to the situation, at high levels your players can decide how easy or difficult that is going to be for them by the amount of forethought and care that they put into it. Maybe they're super cautious and they're going to scout things out with special magic that allows them to see everything in the dungeon, know what they're going up against, and then pick and choose their encounters accordingly. Or maybe they're just going to charge in the front door, kicking everything down and trusting that they can take it out until they run into a roadblock strong enough to cause them to question. You are going to have to spend a little bit more time on the rules when you're dealing with high-level campaigns in order to fully understand what's being put out into play, and you're going to have a bit of willingness to bend and accept that the plans that you've made are simply guidelines as to what you think things are going to look like, and just allow that to get shattered as your expectations are subverted and things go wildly off path. Creating a handful of what John 4 has titled back pocket encounters that are suitable to the level of your campaign can be a great way to improvise when things go in a direction that you haven't foreseen. Those might be role-playing encounters that don't care what level your players are, or they could be something as deadly as an ambush of purposeful assassins sent by one of your big bad evil guys. Having a variety of those kinds of encounters settled and in place for when they're appropriate is a great way to buy a little bit of time to think about how to handle the changes in direction that come so far and fast in a typical game at high levels. What can spoil a game of high-level Dungeons & Dragons is being enslaved to the rules and concerned about your story turning out a specific way. Being enslaved to the rules is not a tremendously bad problem most of the time, because if you are following the rules as closely as possible, at least your players know what to expect. But if we get a little too precious about how our story is supposed to unfold, then high-level play is going to feel really frustrating for us. It is true that vast swaths of a written module might be ignorable with the appropriate usage of a handful of spells and choices, but most of the time that's not going to be the case. But when we get too tied up in knots about making sure that we have the story end the way we want it to, that's when we get into danger with high-level play. And basically, that's the key to playing past level 12 in general, is just to not tie yourself down into how an encounter is supposed to turn out, and instead set it up and see how it comes. This makes high-level play so much more exciting than low-level play, which can be more predictable, because you can look at it and say, this is what is going to happen, and be fairly assured of the outcome. Whereas at high level play, you really don't have a clue. And so all you can do is try to think in the heads of your big bad evil guys and your creatures and your story, and see what would happen next given the choices that the players make. In Rise of Tiamat, for instance, a campaign that is well known for being on pretty solid rails throughout the entirety of its length. At the highest levels of play, when you have access to spells that completely change how things come to pass, you can allow that story to naturally shift and change. It doesn't matter how the party stops Tiamat from re-entering the material plane, only that they do. Do they do it by the established path of stopping it at the last second, or do they find a way to take away all of the tools that allow it to come to pass in the first place? Do they shift down into Avernus themselves and make some kind of deal with the powers that be, or Tiamat herself, that makes her not want to leave or not be able to leave the Nine Hells in order to come back? It doesn't matter how they solve the problem, only that they do. And so by looking at your story as less of a series of events that has to be followed and more as a situation that needs to be managed, you can open your player's eyes to possibilities and your own eyes to those opportunities to run the game how it's going to play out according to the role play of your characters. Because role play is not about funny voices and voice acting. Role play is about making decisions from the perspective of your character. And the more tools that characters have, the more powerful their decisions become. And it doesn't matter that I never got to put my 3D printed, hand-painted Tiamat miniature on the table in my home game of Rise of Tiamat. The fact that I was able to threaten to bring it into existence and then that the party stopped that from happening made everybody's day and had people shouting in excitement when the final blow fell and they knew that they had saved the realms. Brady, I hope this helps to give you just some idea, essentially to let go of the stress of running high-level encounters and to just plan for every eventuality by not planning for all of the eventualities, but thinking in the head of your character, or in this case, in the head of your NPC, as to what they would do next in reactive fashion instead of trying to script it all out beforehand. If you want me to talk on a topic, then go ahead and leave a comment below. If you want to make me talk about your topic, then go ahead and join as a tank class supporter. Help keep the lights on, get access to the videos early, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Happy adventuring.